At the will reading, my parents beamed while the lawyer handed my sister a $7 million check. Me nothing. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother smirked. Some kids just don't measure up. The room tilted until the lawyer opened my grandpa's final letter, and my mother's smile cracked into a scream. My name is Zephyr Quill. I'm the grandson they tried to cut out, the one my grandfather trusted with the only thing that ever mattered, the truth. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes even the smallest connection makes all the difference. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. It seems small, but your support keeps this story alive and helps me protect what my grandfather left behind. Thank you. And now, here's everything. I hadn't driven down the oak-lined streets of Savannah in years, yet the sight of them hit me like a memory I wasn't ready to face. Sunlight pierced through the heavy canopy, weaving in and out of the hanging Spanish moss like it was slipping between secrets. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I passed the same brick sidewalks I'd walked barefoot on as a boy when the world seemed simpler, before I learned that family didn't always mean home. Every block pulled another memory to the surface, mostly the ones I'd worked so hard to bury. My mother Evelyn's voice cutting through a room, the way she could reduce me to nothing in front of a dozen relatives without raising her tone. When the Wells house finally came into view, it stood exactly as it had in my mind. Red brick walls glowing faintly in the sun. A broad, white-columned porch lace curtains swaying in the breeze like polite waves to strangers. Perfect. Immaculate. And to me, a fortress built on lies. I pulled into the gravel drive, the crunch under my tires oddly loud in the quiet morning. The scent hit me the moment I stepped inside, polished wood mixed with the artificial warmth of vanilla candles. It was the same fragrance that had always floated through the air at our formal dinners back when conversation was measured. Pauses were strategic and no one said what they truly meant. Somewhere deep in the house, the steady tick of the grandfather clock marked every second I had once wasted chasing their approval. Evelyn sat in her throne-like armchair by the fireplace, a silk blouse immaculate under the soft light, her expression that familiar blend of appraisal and dismissal. Roland, my father, lingered by the window, hands clasped neatly behind his back, as if he were observing a landscape only he understood. Sienna, my older sister, sat cross-legged, one polished heel, swinging lazily, eyes scanning me like I was a curiosity on display. Vernon Holt, the family's long-standing attorney, cleared his throat and began. His voice was steady, almost ceremonial, as he read the terms of Gideon Wells's will. Sienna's name came first. She would inherit $7 million in cash, plus managerial rights over part of the family's vacation properties. My stomach tightened, though I kept my face still. Then came my turn. There is no allocation of assets to Zephyr Quill Wells. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Evelyn broke the silence with a faint, cold smile. Some children simply don't qualify. Roland didn't even look at me when he added, "If you want something, earn it yourself." Sienna's lips curled into a small, knowing smirk. I felt heat surge to my ears, but I forced it down. Losing my temper would be exactly what they wanted. I let my gaze travel around the room, noting the flicker of discomfort in a few distant relatives' eyes, enough to tell me they hadn't seen this coming, but no one spoke up. I picked up the glass of water in front of me and drank slowly, my silence calculated a shield they couldn't penetrate. Vernon shuffled his papers, ready to conclude, when he paused. "There is one additional document from Mr. Wells that we haven't yet reviewed." The air shifted. Evelyn's posture stiffened, Roland's brows drew together, and Sienna tilted her head ever so slightly. Something unplanned had just entered the room. I could feel it in my chest, a ripple under the surface. Vernon reached into his leather case and drew out a cream-colored envelope, its flaps sealed with deep red wax stamped with the Wells crest. My breath caught at the sight of the handwriting, slanted, deliberate, inked in that particular shade of blue my grandfather always used. In an instant, I was 9 years old again, perched at the edge of his desk in the Wells Ecolab blue ink, staining my fingers as I tried to keep up with his notes on pollination cycles. That he had said, chuckling as I rubbed at the smudge, is the color of curiosity. Vernon broke the seal and unfolded the letter. His voice softened, though I could hear the weight in every word. Gideon wrote about the first day he took me to the Ecolab, how I had knelt in the dirt with a magnifying glass, tracing the veins of a leaf as if it were a map. He wrote, "You are the only one in this family who has ever seen the life inside each branch, each grain of soil." The letter stated without hesitation that he was leaving the Wells Ecolab to me. The building, the research equipment, the funding accounts, and the rights to every patent under its name, all mine. No restrictions, no conditions. The room froze. Evelyn shot to her feet, her voice rising in a sharp, brittle pitch. "This is absurd. This part was never mentioned before." Roland's eyes narrowed, his jaw working silently. Sienna leaned forward, the usual gloss in her tone stripped away. "What exactly are these patents worth?" she demanded. Vernon's reply was firm. "All of this was signed, notarized, and filed well before Mr. Wells's passing. His wishes are final." Something clicked in my mind. The Ecolab sat on land my family had always dismissed as commercially useless, warning me to never waste time there. But if Gideon had secured patents in sustainable agriculture, that property could be worth far more than they'd ever admitted. And then I saw it. Evelyn's complexion draining as Vernon continued. "No one but Zephyr has the authority to sell or transfer ownership of the Ecolab." For the first time in years, I felt the ground shift in my favor. When the reading ended, Evelyn leaned in close enough for only me to hear. Her perfume was cloying, but her tone was sharper than glass. "You will regret keeping that place." I met her eyes, letting the cold in mine answer for me. Because for the first time, I held something she couldn't touch. The road out to the Wells Ecolab cut through a patchwork of marsh and pine, the city's brick and balcony charm, giving way to wind and sky. The building itself rose out of the trees like something grown rather than built, timber siding, weathered to a soft gray steel beams, clean and spare windows tall as barn doors. The air smelled like damp soil and cedar. Sunlight fell through the glass in wide bands, turning dust motes into a slow parade. Somewhere beyond the greenhouse walls, bees hummed over rows of test beds and flowering cover crops. It felt like stepping into oxygen after years of holding my breath. No ticking clocks, no perfume-sweet candles, just light earth and the patient music of living things. In Gideon's office, the past waited as if it had kept the lights on for me. The desk was the same solid oak nicked at the corners. The chair still creaked at the same protest when I leaned into it. On the shelf, I spotted a familiar spine-brown craft paper rubbed smooth at the edges. When I opened the notebook, the pages sailed me straight back to 9 years old crooked diagrams of apiaries, silly arrows labeling worker drone queen, my looping questions crowding the margins. Near the center, in his unmistakable blue ink, Gideon had written, "Keep watching. The world needs your eyes." I ran a thumb over the words. The paper had thinned where the pen pressed hardest, as if he'd wanted the message to sink all the way through. I should have stopped there. I should have let the hope of that line be enough for one day. Instead, I slid open the lower drawer, stiff, reluctant, and felt around until my fingers hit the lip of a metal box. Inside, file copies, receipts, a scattering of clipped notes. Beneath them, folded twice and rubber-banded, sat a stack of printed call logs. The date columns ran through the months before Gideon died. The caller ID ping-ponged between Ecolab and his home line. The recipient number was mine. In the remarks column, written by hand in blue that wasn't as warm as his, someone had scrawled the same verdict again and again. No answer, blocked by family. The script wasn't quite slanted. It leaned forward like a shove. Evelyn's handwriting. A heat rose in my chest that didn't feel like anger so much as altitude sickness. So it hadn't just been silence. It had been engineered. Every missed chance, every unanswered voicemail I blamed on timing or grief had been clipped away by the person who loved appearances more than anything that ever breathed. I rubbed the corner of a page until the paper flaked. The logs made a brittle little sound when I set them back down. Needing air, I crossed to the cabinet Gideon used for active projects. A green folder sat alone on the middle shelf, label as neat as a hospital chart, Project Evergreen. Someone had stamped confidential in red below a small leaf icon. Inside, the first page outlined a multi-year study linking regenerative soil practices to yield stability and reduced input costs. The following pages were a lattice of trial maps, data summaries, funding tranches. Near the back, a memo referenced exploratory conversations with a nationally known organic foods company, one whose logo appeared on grocery end caps from Savannah to Seattle. A sticky note had flagged the page. It had been removed, but the square of faint residue remained. Value lived in these papers. So did motive. If you were someone who measured worth in dollars and parties, you might call this a prize. If you were someone like Gideon, you'd call it responsibility. And if you were someone like Evelyn, you'd call it leverage. I closed the folder and slid it back precisely where I'd found it. My phone buzzed, Talia checking in a brief line of text that made me smile despite everything. I drafted a reply, then deleted it. Not yet. The fewer people attached to this, the safer it was. I needed to understand all of it before I let anyone else into the room. Outside, the hives pulsed with their ordinary miracle. I suited up, lifted a frame, watched 1,000 tiny bodies ladder themselves into purpose. Bees don't argue about who deserves what. They trade heat in winter and shade in summer, pass sweetness from mouth to mouth, and build a world from borrowed light. I stood among them until the sound evened my breathing. I didn't speak out loud because the promise didn't need witnesses. But I made it anyway, right there with the hum of the hives in my bones. I would keep what Gideon gave me safe. Not because of what it might be worth, but because of who it proved I was, and who he still believed I could be. That night, with the windows open to the last of the day's heat, I read the call logs again. Every mark of that blue pen was both absence and instruction. I slid the notebook with his message to the top of the stack and left the office the way I'd found it. When I locked the door, the deadbolt clicked like a period at the end of a sentence I was finally ready to finish. The first sign something was wrong arrived in small, annoying ways. The mailbox at the front gate hung open one morning, the hinge squealing high and theatrical when I shut it. The security app on my phone pinged with 2 late-night entries that never completed, failed code attempts spaced exactly 12 minutes apart like someone with a timetable. By the 3rd day, I set a stool by the server rack and watched the cameras spool through time. Just after midnight, a figure in a dark suit slipped along the gravel and into the shadows of the greenhouse. Even in the grainy light, I recognized the careful, efficient walk. Sienna's assistant, the one who never smiled unless she needed something signed. He didn't get far, motion sensors flared him white as a scarecrow, and he retreated, but not before pausing to glance toward the office wing as if he were making a note. By mid-morning, Sienna arrived with a bakery box and the kind of cheerful expression people put on when they're preparing to pry open a vault. She didn't wait to be invited. She breezed in, set croissants on the counter like a blessing, and took the swivel chair opposite mine. "This place is surprisingly cute," she said, turning in a slow circle. I pictured more. Industrial. "It works," I said. She crossed one leg over the other heel, dangling. "So, the project your little fan club online keeps speculating about. Evergreen. That the one I kept my face neutral and reached for a napkin. I'm still inventorying. You should let me help." She smiled like a favor was an act of charity. We could get something formal on the calendar with who I asked, bored enough to make it sound casual. She took the bait without thinking. "Well, if you're going to be stubborn about it, anyone can see an alignment with Green Harvest would be smart." Mom's already read through some of Granddad's notes. There it was. The slip. I folded the napkin, buying myself a second. "Green Harvest," I repeated like I was filing away a new word. "We're not at that stage. You will be." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Or you'll realize you should have listened to people who know how to make good things bigger." "I'm planning a deep clean here," I said, drifting toward the cabinet with the non-committal posture of someone thinking out loud. "We'll need a full audit before any partnerships. Protocols, chain of custody, that sort of thing. Can't rush it." Impatience flashed and vanished. She lifted the bakery box lid, left a croissant like an unasked-for offering, and walked out with the same light click of heels I'd heard on our parents' marble floors my whole life. When the door closed, I waited until her car engine receded to let myself breathe. That afternoon, I met Vernon at a cafe off Chippewa Square, the kind with tile that looked original and coffee that tasted like someone cared how water met heat. He accepted the file copies without asking for a preamble, scanned the call logs, and exhaled through his nose. "Your grandfather almost signed a memorandum with Green Harvest," he said. "He canceled at the last minute. He told me privately he was worried the project would become a tool for the family machine instead of what he intended. What did he intend, I asked, though I already knew. To prove that good stewardship and good business weren't enemies, Vernon said. He tapped the logs. You should also know what they might try next. If they can't move you, they may try to move the court. Question your capacity to manage the asset, paint you as unstable, unfit. It won't be easy for them, but it's a card some people like to wave around to see who flinches. I sipped coffee that had gone lukewarm and pictured Evelyn in a lawyer's office describing me in studied fragments, emotional, unreliable, absent. A version of me that would look persuasive on paper if you'd never watched me spend a weekend rehabbing a busted irrigation rig, or read the notebooks I kept for years just in case someone someday asked me to prove I'd been paying attention. Let them wave, I said. I'm busy. When I got back to the eco lab, the light was sliding long and gold across the test beds. I reset the security timers, added a second code requirement to the office door, and walked the perimeter until the night took over. Crickets started up at the fence line. A breeze rolled through that smelled like basil and loam. Halfway across the experimental garden, I heard a small wrong sound. Too light to be an animal, too careful to be wind. By the time I reached the rows, whoever had made it was gone. In the soft mud by the drip line, a single heel print sank clean and crisp, narrow-toed, expensive. I didn't need a brand chart to know whose footprint echoed like punctuation. I stood under the greenhouse eave until my eyes adjusted to the dark. Somewhere on the far side of the trees, a car door clicked. I waited until silence felt complete again. On my way back inside, I caught my reflection in the glass shirt, rumpled jaw, set eyes that didn't look like a boy asking to be let in anymore. The war they wanted would not live only on letterhead. It would show up as late-night footsteps and open mailboxes and smiles that hid the blade. In Gideon's office, I took the notebook from his shelf and set it on the desk where I could see that one line without even bending. Keep watching. The world needs your eyes. I am, I said into the clean, bright dark. And I will. On Monday morning, my phone buzzed on the workbench while I was cataloging soil samples. Talia's name lit up the screen along with a link. I tapped it, and the Savannah Chronicles headline filled my vision: grandson seizes Ecolab in family feud. The article didn't waste time. It called me the ungrateful heir who had snatched the Ecolab from the family that had built it. It claimed my grandfather had been suffering memory lapses when he signed the will, implying the bequest was a mistake. Below, a candid shot of me leaving the Wells house, head down, jaw tight, sat beside a photo of Sienna, mid-tier mascara, smudged the perfect picture of a sister betrayed. I drove straight to the Wells house. The front door stood open, letting out a wave of perfume so thick it clung to my skin. Laughter floated from the parlor, sharp, bright, practiced. Evelyn stood at the center, glass in hand, surrounded by women with pearl earrings and men with monogrammed cuffs. She smiled at them like a hostess in a magazine spread until she saw me. And this, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. The articles, the photographs, the lies you're going to stop. She took a measured sip of her drink, eyes locking on mine over the rim. The public deserves to know the truth, she said, her voice smooth as lacquer. Truth, I repeated. Her smile didn't waver, but her words came out colder. This has been prepared for a long time, Zephyr. Longer than you think. The weight of that settled in my gut. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment tantrum, it was a campaign built and stocked well before the will was ever read. When I got back to the Ecolab, the gate swung open just far enough to catch the wind. Inside, the evidence hit me in small absences, a row of soil jars missing a digital moisture reader gone from its hook. I pulled up the security feed and froze. There he was, a former technician I remembered all too well, the one Gideon had dismissed for leaking proprietary data. He moved with the assurance of someone who knew the layout by heart. Talia called before I could decide what to do next. Green Harvest just received a data set that matches yours, she said without preamble. Too closely to be coincidence. The only way that could happen was if someone on the inside had given it to them. And if Green Harvest had it now, they could rush a deal before I even reopened the Ecolab to the public. I stood in the lab sunlight falling across rows of labeled jars, each one holding months of work and years of thought. If they wanted to fight dirty, fine. I wasn't here to hide and hope. I would gather my proof, time my release, and make sure that when the story came out, it cut exactly where it needed to. I looked at the way the afternoon light turned the dust in the air to gold and thought about the weight of the name Wells, how much they cared for its shine and how little for its truth. If they wanted a game, I'd play. And I'd remind them that games can turn vicious when you push them far enough. I'd spent enough days reacting. Now it was time to set the pace. The plan formed in 2 layers, one to pull in evidence, the other to draw them out into the open. The first step was fortifying the lab. I installed motion sensors in blind corners and tucked micro cameras where no one would think to look inside the cabinet hinges behind the air vent slats in the lip of the bookshelf. Then I planted a gift in plain sight, a mock draft of Project Evergreen dressed up enough to look convincing but embedded with tracking code in its metadata. If someone took it, I'd know exactly where it landed. 2 days later, my phone pinged with an alert. The bait file had been opened from an IP address linked to Roland's law office. The confirmation sat heavy in my chest. My father wasn't just aware of what was happening, he was part of it. That night, the phone rang after 11. The voice on the other end was low, urgent. "You don't know me, but I used to work at the Eco Lab. Sienna's been paying me to get her certain files. I can't keep doing it." I recognized the name when he gave it another technician who'd left under cloudy circumstances. "Why now?" I asked. "Because 10 years ago your grandfather kept me from going bankrupt," he said. "I can't betray him twice." The words landed deeper than I expected. This wasn't just my fight. Every theft, every smear was a strike against what Gideon had built and the people he had quietly helped along the way. He told me there was a meeting set with Green Harvest to finalize an agreement using the stolen data as proof of concept. They thought they could corner the market before I could even bring the Ecolab back to life. When I hung up, I called Talia. I told her enough to let her know the next move would be ours. "We're not going to stop them," I said. "We're going to let them think they've won, and then we'll let them hang themselves with their own rope." She was quiet for a beat, then said, "Just tell me when." Later, standing in the darkened lab, I watched the blue LED of the server blink on and off, steady as a pulse. The hives outside would be quiet now, the bees clustered together in the cool night. I rested my hand on the edge of the workbench, feeling the grain under my palm. "We're ready," I said to no one, and to Gideon most of all. The light kept blinking, unwavering, like it understood. I started the morning with a post in Savannah's largest community forum, a photograph of the Ecolab bathed in early light, paired with an excerpt from my grandfather's letter, explaining why he had chosen me to inherit it. His handwriting filled the image, deliberate strokes, measured spaces, the kind of script that could not be faked. The post spread quickly. Comments flooded in, some calling me the rightful heir, others accusing me of rewriting history. A tide of anonymous accounts emerged almost instantly, defending Evelyn and Sienna with coordinated precision. Their words carried the same phrasing, the same pointed insinuations. By midday, my phone rang during a project meeting. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. "Take it down," she ordered the moment I answered. Her voice was tight, sharp enough to cut. "No," I said simply. Her reply came fast, almost like a reflex. "If you keep this up, I'll let the whole city know you're not even Roland's blood." The room seemed to tilt. It was the first time I had ever heard those words. I let the silence stretch, her breathing ragged on the other end, before hanging up. The next day, a new article appeared, this time claiming through a trusted source that I was preparing to sell the Ecolab to a foreign investor. The fabrication was cleanly crafted, laced with just enough invented detail to unsettle people. Messages poured in from colleagues and community members, some worried, some angry. The story had done its job. Instead of answering online, I sent invitations to local reporters asking them to visit the Ecolab. That afternoon, I walked them through our active projects, the research still in progress, the archives intact. While they toured, I released a short video to the community forum, grainy security footage showing Sienna's assistant rifling through Ecolab files. I didn't add names or context, only the caption. "Sometimes the danger comes from inside the family." That evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The man introduced himself as a director from Green Harvest. "We're canceling the meeting with Evelyn and Sienna," he said. "We're not getting dragged into family disputes." It was the first direct fracture in their plans, the first piece of leverage that cut into their financial ambitions. Hours later, a text came from an unlisted number. "We will not let you take this family down. Watch yourself on Friday." Friday was the Wells Foundation's anniversary gala, Savannah's most visible stage where the family paraded its influence in front of donors, politicians, and the press. If they wanted a confrontation there, I would be ready. The ballroom at the Grand Savoy Hotel was dressed to impress crystal chandeliers throwing light over rows of white linen tables, the air threaded with the scent of wine and gardenias. Guests mingled in formal wear, their conversations punctuated by clinks of crystal. Evelyn moved through the crowd with perfect poise, one hand on Sienna's arm, their smiles like polished glass. They laughed too easily, heads inclining toward whispered confidences, each gesture reinforcing the image of a family unshaken. I arrived in a plain, well-cut suit, Talia by my side. In my inner pocket, a USB drive held scanned pages of my grandfather's letter security footage from the Ecolab break-in, and a record of calls Evelyn had intercepted to keep me from speaking with him in his final weeks. When Evelyn took the stage to speak about legacy and unity, I stepped forward and asked for a single minute to honor my grandfather's memory. She hesitated, but with the audience watching, she stepped aside. The projector behind us flickered to life. My grandfather's handwriting filled the screen, his words clear and steady. "I leave the Ecolab to Zephyr because he understands its mission not for the sake of name or lineage, but for the work yet to be done." The image faded into the security footage, Sienna's assistant in the Ecolab at night pulling files from a cabinet, her face half turned toward the camera. Then came the call log dates and times in black and white showing Evelyn's interference. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the sound system. Evelyn's face drained of color. Sienna shot to her feet, shouting something I couldn't hear over the low tide of whispers spreading across the tables. One by one, people began to leave. 2 major donors set down their glasses and walked out without a word. I could see the cracks forming here in the place where they had always been untouchable. I looked straight at Evelyn. "He didn't leave Ecolab to me because of blood," I said, my voice steady. "He left it to me because he knew I'd protect what it stands for. And tonight, this city knows it too." No applause followed, but the eyes on me were no longer hostile. Some were curious, others assessing, a few openly approving. The narrative had shifted. As I stepped down from the stage, I could feel the weight lifting, not gone, but moving. The fight wasn't finished, but I wasn't chasing their moves anymore. Outside, the night air carried the briny edge of the river. I drew a deep breath, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like swallowing glass. The morning after the Wells Foundation Gala, Savannah felt smaller, as if every conversation carried an echo of last night. Local papers ran my photograph on the front page, me standing on stage, the projection of my grandfather's letter behind me like a verdict. One headline called it, "The Night the Wells Legacy Cracked." My phone lit up non-stop. Messages from strangers offering their support tangled with anonymous threats promising I would regret humiliating the family. Some I deleted without reading, others I saved just in case. Evelyn disappeared from public view under the guise of health concerns. Sienna was quietly placed on indefinite leave from the jewelry company where she served as PR director officially for internal review. But I knew it was tied to whispers about her role in the Ecolab break-in. Roland stayed silent, which was unusual. Vernon, my most trusted contact, called to tell me Roland had been inquiring about selling off properties held in his name alone. It didn't take much imagination to see why, either to cover debts or to brace for legal trouble. Later that week, Vernon handed me something I hadn't dared hope for, a copy of a preliminary contract between Evelyn, Sienna, and Green Harvest. It spelled out a profit-sharing arrangement tied to Ecolab's patent signed before my grandfather's death. It was a blueprint for theft, proof that their intentions had been set long before he was gone. I called for a meeting at my attorney's office. Evelyn arrived in a tailored black dress, her eyes guarded. Sienna came in late, jaw tight, avoiding my gaze. Roland followed, moving more slowly than I'd ever seen him, as though age had settled on him all at once. When I placed the contract and the intercepted call logs on the table, the silence was heavy. Evelyn looked down, saying nothing. Sienna's face flushed with anger. Roland simply exhaled as if he'd been carrying a truth he could no longer deny. I spoke evenly. I won't pursue criminal charges if you sign a legal statement relinquishing all rights to Ecolab and Project Evergreen and issue a public apology in the Savannah Chronicle. Evelyn began to object, but Roland cut her off. Sign it, he said, his voice low but final. He knew that fighting me in court would bleed them dry. The documents were signed within the hour. When I stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the weight I'd been carrying for months felt lighter, not gone, but no longer crushing. The brick sidewalks of Savannah glowed under the golden light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that the brightness was meant for me. Months later, the Ecolab was almost unrecognizable, not in its purpose, but in its reach. The glass house now welcomed university students, local school children, and community volunteers. Classes on sustainable agriculture filled the calendar. Bee colonies thrived in newly built hives, and the soil restoration projects my grandfather dreamed of had become reality. I worked alongside the research teams, not just overseeing, but getting my hands dirty. I was no longer defending a legacy. I was living it. One quiet afternoon, my grandmother Lila visited. She walked slowly through the Ecolab, pausing to touch the leaves of plants she recognized from decades past. Then she handed me a small silver pocket watch. "This was Gideon's," she said. When I clicked it open, I found a small photograph tucked inside the 9-year-old me, crouched beside a blooming magnolia, eyes fixed on its petals. He always believed time would prove who truly deserved this place, she told me. Later, I stood beneath that same magnolia tree in the courtyard. Sunlight streamed through its white blossoms, painting dappled patterns across my hands. Bees drifted lazily between flowers, their steady hum the soundtrack of a world my grandfather had wanted to protect. I whispered to the air, "Tomorrow we keep building." It was a promise not just to him, but to myself, a vow to carry forward without needing the approval of the well's name. In my mind's eye, I could see the moment from above, like the closing frame of a film, me standing under the magnolia, the Ecolab bathed in light behind me, bees glinting like flecks of gold in the air. And in my voice, steady and certain, my grandfather left me more than a laboratory. He left me freedom.